What's a secret you'll take to the grave? Story 1. When I was in second grade, I had one of the most humiliating experiences of my life 3 days in a row. My teacher had a strict policy. No bathroom breaks, even during free time in class. The first 2 days, I ended up wetting my pants in class because she refused to let me go. The third time, I spent 10 minutes begging her before she finally relented, but I didn't make it. I wet my pants on the way to the bathroom. My family only knows about one of those incidents, but I had to endure the embarrassment 3 times, all in the first week of school. After that, I started bringing a water bottle to class and discreetly peeing in it whenever I had to. I did this for the rest of the year. Looking back, if I could go back in time, I'd tell my younger self to just pee on her desk. That would have been less humiliating than wetting myself 3 days in a row. Story 2. About a week before I graduated high school, my family experienced a massive house fire. We lived out in the country, and since no one was home, by the time anyone noticed it was on fire, it was already too far gone. Flames were shooting 30 feet above the roof. We lost everything, but thankfully we had insurance, and no one was hurt. At the time, I was taking a chemistry class where about 70% of the grade depended on a lab notebook that was graded all at once at the end of the semester. We would do labs every week and then complete write-ups in the notebook. Unfortunately, I had been slacking off and was way behind on the assignment. To catch up, I would have needed to pull a few all-nighters just to turn something in. The day after the fire, I went to class and told my teacher that my notebook had been destroyed in the fire and that I had no idea how I would ever complete the assignment. He was incredibly kind, told me not to worry about it, and gave me 100% on the entire assignment. He said I had bigger things to worry about. I was about to graduate, and he hoped my family was doing okay. Well, the notebook was in my car the whole time. I threw it away and swore myself to secrecy. Story 3. When I was in high school, I had trouble talking to people. I was the shy kid. One day, I found out my cousin went to the same school. He was in a similar boat as me, though he was more social and funnier. However, he didn't really click with others, just with me. We became best friends and had a blast at lunch every day. One day, a really cute girl invited me to go eat sushi with her, and I was so excited. I had plans with my cousin. It was sort of a tradition for us, but I decided to bail on him. I told him, this really cute girl asked me to eat sushi with her. And although he seemed upset, he told me, cool, have fun. No, when it was time to go eat, I went with the girl, but when we met up with her friends, they decided to eat somewhere else. The problem, there was only room for one more in their car. Without hesitating, the girl said yes, hopped in, and left me behind. I was devastated. I didn't have the courage to face my cousin or tell him what had happened. As I walked through the hallways, I was scared of running into him. Eventually, I passed by the library and saw him sitting there, alone, passing the time. It broke my heart. I had ditched him. And for what? Never again. Bros before everything. Story 4. When I was 6, I had an experience I didn't tell my mother about until 15 years later. My paternal grandmother had 2 dogs, Tessa, a Ditzy Maltese, and Bindi, a Rhodesian Ridgeback. Tessa was too sweet and clueless to ever be mean, so we always played with her during visits. Binder, on the other hand, was always locked away in part of the house. When I asked why, my mother would just say, Bindi doesn't like kids. My mother had reasons to be wary of dogs like Bindi. When I was born, she had to put down her first dogs because they were aggressive toward me, even throwing themselves at windows if they saw me. For the first year and a half of my life, we operated under an airlock system, with 2 doors always between me and the dogs. When my grandmother moved to the house directly behind ours, we installed a gate between our yards. Suddenly, Bindi was accessible. We kept a respectful distance from her most of the time. One day, I was playing in the garden with KD, our very patient Labrador. We were playing circus, a game that KD endured with endless patience. The only thing that ever made him mad was seeing a horse. Bindi wandered into the yard and started watching us. In a burst of foolishness, I ran toward her, trying to involve her in the game. She panicked and bit me, not hard, but enough to leave some indents and a small bruise. I didn't bleed, but I was scared, so I cried and sulked in my cubby house until I calmed down. I knew I couldn't tell my mom because I'd get in big trouble for playing with Bindi. The next day, I was back in the garden with KD, and Bindi was there too, but I ignored her. For weeks, I avoided her whenever she came near. Then something changed. Bindi started following me everywhere. She'd sit with me, cuddle on the sofa, and stay at my side wherever I went. It was like she was making up for that bite. From then on, she became my sweet and loyal companion. We were best friends for 4 more years until she passed away. My parents always remarked on how miraculous it was that Bindi, an old ornery dog who hated everyone, had suddenly become this oversized lapdog, even years after her passing. They marveled at her transformation. I didn't tell my mom until my 20s that the reason Bindi loved me so much was because she had bitten me. Story 5. When I was a teenager, I saw my friend steal 2 cans of soup. I was on my break at the grocery store where I worked and thought I saw her walk in. Curious, I went looking through the aisles to say hi. When I found her, she had her back to me and was holding a big satchel-style bag. I watched as she quickly tossed 2 cans of soup into it and looked around nervously to make sure no one had seen her. She didn't look behind her. If she had, she would have noticed me. She started walking away. So I called her name cheerfully, as though I'd just spotted her. She turned, looking startled and terrified. She stammered out a quick hello and said she had to run to her mom's car because she forgot something. She didn't come back inside. This was a 16-year-old girl with 3 younger sisters and a single mom who was battling addiction. She had to be more of a parent than her mom ever was. If she was desperate enough to steal 2 cans of soup so her family could eat that night, who was I to embarrass her or say anything to anyone? Story 6. Around 10 years ago, when I was a teenager, my dad, who worked in the video game industry, gave me a high-end gaming laptop worth $3. He didn't need it, but he made it very clear. No drinks near the laptop because I was notoriously clumsy. One night, I brought a huge bowl of cereal into my room and set it next to the laptop while I went to get a spoon. I had a blanket over my shoulders. And as I sat down, I accidentally flipped the bowl over. Milk flooded the open laptop. I panicked. I turned it off, cleaned it as best as I could, and went to bed terrified. The next day, the laptop wouldn't turn on. When my dad asked what happened, I lied, saying it worked perfectly the night before. Years later, I finally confessed to him. To my surprise, he had no idea what really happened. He wasn't even mad. He laughed it off and was impressed that the story had gone viral online. Telling him the truth felt like a huge weight off my shoulders, and I'm glad I finally owned up to it. Story 7. When I was 8 years old, we had pet mice and Kurashuri. One of our female mice gave birth, but she started eating some of her babies. I was horrified and distraught. Why would a mother do that to her own babies? Upset and angry, I rushed to tell my stepfather. Instead of comforting me, his reaction was monstrous. He forced me to kill the mother mouse. He filled the sink with water, dragged me into the kitchen, and grabbed my hand. Despite my cries and struggles, he made me hold the mother mouse underwater until she drowned. I was sobbing the entire time, desperately trying to pull my hand away. But he wouldn't let me, as if that wasn't horrifying enough. He then took the surviving baby mice and fed them to his fish. I think it was called an Oscar fish. Though I'm not entirely sure, I was too young to understand everything. But I knew this was wrong. My stepfather was a deeply abusive and deranged person. Eventually, my mom left him after he beat her so badly that she almost didn't survive. To this day, I've never told anyone this story. Even though I was just a kid and I know he forced me, the shame and pain still linger. Story 8. I was walking my dog on a dirt road near my subdivision. This road ran parallel to several backyards and was lined with trees, making it feel like a secluded nature trail. It was my escape from people and noise. One morning, as I was walking, I spotted 2 of my neighbors. They were both married to other people. They were making out and clearly about to take things further. They were so engrossed in each other that they didn't hear me approaching until my dog barked. We all froze for several seconds, just staring at each other in stunned silence. Then, in Worcester, without a word, they bolted in the direction of their respective backyards. I knew both of them, but we weren't close. And I didn't know their spouses well either. I decided to keep what I saw to myself. Neither of them ever acknowledged what happened, and I've never mentioned it to anyone. I have no idea if that was a one-time thing or part of a long-term affair, but I never saw anything like it again. Story 9. Last Christmas, it was just me and my mom. She's the only family I have. She had prepared a lot of food for the day, but she started drinking heavily and got completely drunk. I didn't realize how bad it was because I was only 17 and had little experience with alcohol. At one point, she tried to cut a piece of pork to give me, but she was so drunk that she couldn't even manage that. About 20 minutes later, she was trying to take the pork out of the oven and ended up dropping it on the kitchen floor. Hot oil spilled everywhere, coating the floor, and making a huge mess. As she clumsily tried to pick up the food, she slipped on the oil and hit her head on the floor. She wasn't knocked unconscious, but she was dazed and confused. I had to clean the food off the floor, wipe the oil off her, and carry her to bed. After that, I spent the rest of the night cleaning the kitchen. Once everything was as clean as I could get it, I drove around town looking for a place to eat on Christmas, but nothing was open. I ended up going to bed hungry. To this day, the only person who knows about that night is my girlfriend. Story 10. When I was about 10, I had a habit of hiding under tables or desks when I was upset. One day at school, something triggered me, so I crawled under a table and just stayed there. Teachers came to talk to me, but I refused to come out. Eventually, they had to call my mom. She came, knelt down, and tried to coax me out. When I still refused, she crawled under the table with me. She held me and talked to me until I felt calm enough to leave. I never forgot that moment. It made me feel so loved. She didn't yell. She didn't embarrass me. She just met me where I was. Literally, it's a small moment, but one of the most comforting memories I have. Story 11. In my senior year of high school, a girl in my class, let's call her Jenny, was the target of a horrible prank. Someone created a fake Instagram account and started posting edited photos of her. They made her look awful, adding acne, changing her body shape, adding nasty captions. It was relentless, and she clearly didn't know who was behind it. A few people thought it was funny. Most were just silent. I knew who did it. It was one of my closest friends. I begged him to stop, but he laughed it off. Eventually, I couldn't take it anymore. I told the school counselor anonymously. The account got shut down, and there was a big talk at school about online bullying. Jenny never found out who reported it. We weren't friends, and I never got credit, but I'm glad I did something. To this day, my friend doesn't know I was the one who reported him. We drifted apart after that, which was probably for the best. Story 12. A few years ago, I was going through a rough patch. I was broke, lonely, and barely holding it together. One day, I saw a post online from a guy offering free therapy sessions for people in need. He was a licensed therapist trying to build experience and wanted to help those who couldn't afford it. I reached out, and we started weekly video calls. I never showed my face, just used a voice. He never pushed, never judged. He helped me through some dark moments and even guided me in finding a job. Eventually, I got back on my feet. I thanked him, and we went our separate ways. I don't even know his full name. I just remember his username, but I think about him often and hope he's doing well. He changed my life, and I never got to properly say goodbye. Story 13. When I was around 13, I accidentally started a small fire in our kitchen. I was trying to make grilled cheese and forgot to turn off the stove. The bread caught fire, and the flames spread to the towel nearby. I panicked, dumped water on it, and thankfully managed to put it out before it spread. The smoke alarm blared, but I opened windows and aired everything out. By the time my mom got home, it looked like nothing had happened. I never told her. She just assumed the alarm had glitched. That night, I couldn't sleep. The guilt and fear sat heavy in my chest. To this day, I've never confessed, but that moment made me way more careful in the kitchen. Now I'm the designated cook in my family, and nobody knows it started with a near disaster. Story 14. During my sophomore year of college, I started dating someone in secret. We were both RAs, resident assistants in different dorms, and relationships between RAs were technically allowed, but strongly discouraged. If caught, we risked losing our positions and free housing, so we kept it quiet. We'd meet late at night, sneak into each other's rooms, and use coded language when texting. It was thrilling at first, but it became stressful. We couldn't go on real dates, and we constantly worried about being found out. Eventually, we both realized it wasn't sustainable. We ended things on good terms. To this day, no one ever found out. We still follow each other on social media, and sometimes we laugh about our secret rendezvous. It was short-lived, but kind of magical in its own way. Story 15. My little sister used to be terrified of the dark. Every night, she would ask me to stay with her until she fell asleep. I was only 2 years older, but I always agreed. I'd lie on the floor next to her bed and tell her made-up stories until she drifted off. Sometimes I'd fall asleep there too. One night, I was exhausted and snapped at her, telling her to grow up and sleep alone. She didn't say anything, just turned away. The next morning, I found her sleeping on the floor outside my bedroom. She didn't want to bother me again, but still needed me nearby. I felt horrible. I hugged her and promised never to turn her away again. Years later, she told me those nights meant the world to her. She doesn't remember the night I snapped, only that I always showed up. It broke me a little, but in a good way. Story 16. I once shoplifted as a teenager. It was just a cheap bracelet from a local store. I didn't need it. I just wanted to feel like I could get away with something. As soon as I left the store, guilt hit me like a truck. I hid the bracelet in a drawer and never wore it. For weeks, I avoided that store, terrified they'd somehow know. Eventually, I snuck back in, left the bracelet on a shelf, and walked out. Nobody ever confronted me, but I still think about it now and then. It wasn't about the bracelet, it was about control. I felt powerless in my life at the time. Stealing gave me a false sense of agency. Now wondering, I try to be honest in all things, even small ones. That one moment of dishonesty taught me more than any lecture ever could. Story 17. From 2015 to 2017, I worked for what I thought was my dream company. My dad had worked there for 20 years, and I believed they treated him well. The pay was great, and I loved the work. During those 2 years, I thrived, receiving great reviews and forming strong relationships with my clients. But after 2 years, the department was restructured, and the last 10 hires, myself included, were laid off. It felt like my world collapsed. My clients and managers complained to no avail. And though some clients wanted to hire me, their offers required relocation, which I couldn't afford. I tried to stay positive, leaning on the grit I'd inherited from my tough, military agricultural family. But being jobless for 3 months in a small town with limited opportunities and $1,700 a month in student loan debt weighed heavily on me. I've always owned firearms for hunting and protection. One night, while spiraling in my thoughts, I found myself holding one of my guns, considering the unthinkable. But when I checked the chamber, a wave of clarity hit me. I put the gun down and cried myself to sleep. A moment of vulnerability that was hard to admit as a 6'7", 300-pound man. The next morning, I collected all my weapons, guns, bullets, bows, arrows, knives, and gave them to my dad. I simply asked him to lock them up and told him I'd ask for them back someday. He didn't ask questions. He just agreed. Deep down, I think he knew what was going on, but he never brought it up. A week later, I reconnected with the woman who would later become my wife. She encouraged me to go back to church, where I found strength and purpose again. 4 months later, I secured a temp job, which led to another and eventually a full-time role in my current career field. About a year ago, just before I got married and moved out, I asked for my guns back. My dad handed them over without saying a word about that night years ago. No one knows I was contemplating suicide that night, outside of possibly my dad. It scares me to think how low I was, but I remind myself that I persevered. I don't share this with loved ones because I don't want them to worry, especially now that I'm in a much better place. Story 18. When I was living on an American military base in Germany, I used to sneak into the tiny convenience store and read porno magazines. I'd carefully open them on the shelves, pretending to look at something else, and read them while trying to be inconspicuous. My plan was to drop the magazine and act like I was reaching for something innocent if I got caught. One day I did get caught, and my plan failed miserably. The store clerk scolded me, saying the magazines were a pain to send back because of their plastic packaging. That wasn't the only time I got caught. I also tried stealing Pokemon cards using the same tactic, opening the packs on the shelf and pocketing the cards. Once, a random army guy caught me in the act. He sternly warned, "You cut that ish out before I send you to jail." That moment scared me so much that I almost literally shat my 11-year-old pants. After that, I kept my hands off the magazines and the cards, at least on base. Story 19. In high school, I tried to befriend a girl who didn't seem to have many friends. I went out of my way to be nice to her. I bought her lunch, lent her clothes, imam, inkun, ihim, shiranun, and even sent pizza to her family for dinner once. When a school dance came up, I found out she'd never been to one, so I decided to take her as a friend date. I went all out. I bought her a dress, but when she didn't like it, I let her wear my favorite dress and shoes instead. I wore the dress I'd originally bought for her. I took her to dinner and dessert, got her a corsage, and made sure everything was perfect. But as soon as we arrived at the dance, she disappeared. She didn't respond to my texts, and I didn't have anyone else to hang out with. So I left early. She stayed best certain when I saw her next. I asked for my dress and shoes back. She told me she'd bring them, but didn't show up to school for weeks. When she finally returned, she said the dress was ripped and one of the heels on my shoes was broken. I was upset, but told her it was fine and tried to move on. 2 days later, she stole $80 from my bag. The money wasn't even mine, it was for a club fundraiser. I reported it to the school, but they wouldn't do anything about it. That's when I decided to get back at her boyfriend, who always flirted with me, sold coke. I convinced him to give me some for free and slipped it into her bag during gym. Then I reported her to campus security for the reward money. I thought she'd just get sent to boot camp for a week like everyone else. It wasn't supposed to be a big deal, but it turns out she'd been lying about her age. She was actually 21 and already on probation. She ended up going to prison. Part of me feels bad because I didn't mean to ruin her entire life. I just wanted to get some justice for how she treated me. But another part of me feels like she brought it on herself. Story 20. My father once told me a story from his youth and made me promise never to tell anyone. It's one of the most bizarre and haunting things I've ever heard. When he was around 20 years old, he met a couple of Argentinians who were eccentric hippies. They taught him how to make mushroom tea, a recipe that I now know too. After they left, my dad decided to try making the tea, not to drink it, but because he was fascinated with chemistry, he ended up with a dark black liquid, which he poured into a small Coca-Cola bottle. That same day, he was invited to a festa junina, a traditional country-themed party in Brazil. He brought the bottle with him and, for reasons he couldn't explain, poured the entire contents into a large cauldron of quentão, a mulled wine drink when no one was looking. The rest of the night was absolute chaos. People were freaking out left and right, having panic attacks, seeing hallucinations, and thinking they were dying. Every time one person calmed down, another would start screaming or behaving wildly. My father watched in absolute terror as the entire party descended into madness. Realizing what he had done, he never confessed to anyone and just kept quiet, horrified by the scene he'd created. To this day, the thought of that story haunts me. It's such an insane thing to imagine happening. And knowing my dad was behind it is both surreal and unsettling. Story 21. I'm deeply convinced that I'm going to become homeless. While this fear isn't uncommon among people with severe mental illness like me, it's not just fear, it's a persistent, all-encompassing belief. I spend so much time zoned out, imagining what it will be like and trying to plan for it. I think about how I'll survive, where I'll sleep, where I'll find food, and how I'll stay safe. When I'm out in my city, I scout places that look safe to sleep. I take mental notes of food banks, shelters, and places where I might shower or wash my clothes. I've even planned how I might get to a warmer state in the winter. I've been doing this for over a decade. Every day, my mind goes there. 2 people I grew up with became long-term homeless due to substance use and mental illness. Watching them slip through the cracks has reinforced this fear for me. Rationally, I know I have a loving partner and friends who would never let me end up on the streets. But a part of me is certain it's going to happen anyway. At its core, this belief comes from anxiety and a hyper-awareness of how fragile life is. Most people seem to subconsciously believe that things like homelessness can't happen to them. But I don't feel that way. I feel hyper-aware that terrible things can happen to anyone. I see people living on the streets and think, why not me? There's so little separating us. It feels like it all comes down to luck. And my luck has never been good. Story 22. When I was 15, I tried to take my own life. I overdosed on about 40 extra-strength Tylenol pills, the only thing I had access to at the time. A few hours later, as the realization of what I'd done set in, I panicked and stumbled into my parents' room in the middle of the night. I was terrified to tell them, but I did. They rushed me to the hospital, and I was flown via helicopter to a larger facility for treatment. Afterward, I spent 2.5 months at a residential treatment facility where I finished out the school year. Only my immediate family knows that I went to my parents for help. When I returned to school, rumors swirled about why I had left. And eventually, people found out I had attempted suicide. I've never told anyone that I saved myself because I've always been afraid people would think I wasn't serious or that I just did it for attention. What most people don't know is that I had been carrying those pills with me for a long time, waiting for the right moment. On the night I finally did it, my little brother was asleep in the bunk bed above me. As I lay there waiting, the thought of him finding me the next morning is what ultimately saved me. That moment of clarity, the love I had for him, pushed me to get up and ask for help. It was the darkest time of my life. But I'm here now because I couldn't bear to hurt him. That thought stays with me to this day. Story 23. There was this girl I was friends with years ago. Someone I cared about so deeply that I could say I loved her. I never told her, though not until I finally had the chance and chose to cast it aside. We were great friends, and I loved her so much that I became whatever she needed me to be. Her confidant, her protector, her advisor, her chauffeur, and the guy who stayed sober so everyone could get home safely. I knew everything about her dreams, her fears, her wishes. I wiped her tears, made her laugh, and stood by her side no matter what. Around her, I felt like the best version of myself, a loyal knight, unshakable, always smiling, and ready to bring her joy. But she didn't know me beyond that. She never saw past the armor. My mind is a nightmare, shaped by a tough upbringing, riddled with anxiety, panic attacks, and a deep lack of self-respect. I struggled to sleep, felt like a zombie, and at my lowest points, thought I might die at any moment. Yet I always stood by her, hiding everything I was going through. One night, we were lying on the ground drinking, and she told me she loved me. It was the best feeling I've ever had, even to this day. But I couldn't accept her love. My life was a mess, family issues, financial struggles, mental health problems, an uncertain future. I couldn't bring myself to share that burden with her. I couldn't let her see the broken person beneath the armor. So I let her down gently, and it crushed me. I still think about that decision and wonder if it was the right one. Did I protect her from my chaos? Or did I miss out on something beautiful? I'll never know. It's my little secret now, ours. Story 24. Forgive the format. I'm on mobile. I've been battling depression for about 10 years, maybe even longer. My life has been extraordinarily shitty, but I've worked hard to make it better. I went from having no education to earning a degree and landing a job that pays $67 a year, all within 3 years. I married someone I truly loved, and he's been a good dad to my son. But then things fell apart. For 3 years, my husband ignored all my physical and emotional needs, even after I tried talking to him about it. Eventually, he cheated on me, and that was the breaking point. I snapped and told him I wanted a divorce. I moved out, got some of my life together, and tried to move on. My son stayed with my ex because he's in the final years of school, doing well academically for once, and I didn't want to disrupt that. I tell people it's better to be alone than to feel alone in a relationship. But honestly, I don't know anymore. I don't miss my ex or love him anymore, but I feel stuck. Sometimes I think about how I could disappear, and it wouldn't make much of a difference. Or my son forgot my birthday and Mother's Day. And while holidays don't matter much to me, it reinforced this feeling of just existing, being here, but not really being seen. Don't worry, I'm not going to harm myself. My son depends on me. And even when he's grown and on his own, I refuse to leave him like my mom left me. I've thought about getting help, but deep down, I don't think talking to someone will change anything. For now, I just keep going, hoping things will feel better someday. Story 25. When I was around 15 or 16, I'm 28 now, I got into an online game called Gunz. The Duel. The game had an option to purchase in-game items using simple bank details, the account holder's name, bank account number, and the associated bank. Being a brilliant teenager, I thought, how hard could it be to get this info? After some digging, I stumbled upon an online forum for a web shop where people were posting these exact details, calling out sellers they suspected were scammers. I started using this information to buy tons of in-game merchandise. I justified it to myself by thinking, they're scammers. so it's not really wrong. This worked fine for a while, until one of the accounts I used turned out to belong to an innocent person who'd been falsely accused on the forum. That person noticed the unauthorized transactions, reported them to the police, and everything spiraled out of control. Detectives were assigned to the case, and it was treated as serious bank fraud. They eventually traced everything back to me. When they reached out, I panicked and came up with a story. I claimed that I'd been scammed by someone online who gave me the bank details and told me to use them for my transactions in the game. Shockingly, they believed me. The game officials cleared all the merchandise from my account, and the case was closed. To this day, no one knows I was the mastermind behind the fraud. It's a secret I've kept all these years, and it'll stay buried here with this confession. Story 26. When I was about 10 or 11, I went to a friend's birthday pool party. There were around 15 other boys there, most of whom knew each other from school. But I didn't. I felt like an outsider. The pool was incredible, uniquely shaped with boulders, a rock water slide, and lots of hidden spots to hang out. One of the boys, Nenarida Bafarit Kamankin, Shetariridi, stood out immediately. He was the stereotypical spoiled kid. Athletic, rich Rius, Churashurinonmunch, Kunnegi. Good-looking and incredibly arrogant. Even though it wasn't his party or house, he acted like he was the leader. He rate him. He hogged all the toys, made sure he was first for everything. And somehow, everyone else seemed to adore him. At one point, we were throwing all sorts of balls in the pool, footballs, basketballs, beach balls, and it got chaotic. I noticed that with all the balls flying around, it was dangerous to keep your head up in the water if you were in the middle of the pool. So when Chet was in the middle, I positioned myself on a step near a boulder. It gave me cover and great leverage. I used every ounce of strength to throw a football at him from about 10 to 15 feet away. I didn't think I'd actually hit him, but I did, right in the side of his face. No one saw me do it or figured out the trajectory of the ball. It was so chaotic that people just shrugged and moved on. On the other hand, wailed and cried while everyone said, "I don't know who threw it." It could have been anyone. He was fine 30 minutes later and back to being his usual self. But I wasn't intimidated by him anymore. I've seen him a few times near where I grew up. He's still kind of a jerk, but seems happy enough with his life. Meanwhile, my world has grown much larger than his, and I'm very happy with where I am today compared to where he ended up. That moment in the pool, let's just say, it felt like a small, satisfying victory. Story 27. Years ago, I was a heavy drinker, problematically so. Christmas has always been a big deal in my family, with relatives coming from all over the country to gather at my parents' house. Ironically, addiction and alcoholism are also big issues in my family. On Christmas Eve, I went to a CVS drive-thru to pick up some medication. After dropping off my prescription, I decided to head to my usual bar for a few drinks while it was being filled. Before long, they called to say my meds were ready, so I left the bar and picked them up. But since I had time to kill, I went back to the bar for more drinks. It was Christmas Eve, and everyone was buying rounds of shots. I drank hard, too hard. When I finally decided to leave, I knew I was wasted. At the time, I had a terrible routine of taking an Adderall to sober up when I needed to keep going. I was a bartender back then, so in my drunken haze, I instinctively took a pill and started driving home. On the way, I passed the same CVS I had been to earlier. I was so drunk that I thought I still needed to pick up my meds. I went through the drive-thru again and asked the pharmacist for my prescription. They awkwardly told me to wait a moment and walked away. The next thing I knew, I was being woken up by a bunch of cops. I had passed out in the drive-thru, and the employees had called the police. They asked me to park the car and step out. At that moment, the gravity of the situation hit me. I realized I was about to get arrested on Christmas Eve, and my entire family would find out. The shame of disappointing my mom overwhelmed me. There were 11 officers surrounding me while I did the sobriety test. I knew I reeked of alcohol and expected to be arrested. After I finished the test, the officers huddled up in disgust among themselves. Finally, the main officer came back and said, "You don't seem too drunk, but I can smell alcohol on you. I'm not going to arrest you, but I can't let you drive." I was so relieved I almost cried. One of the deputies drove me home and scolded me the entire way about how lucky I was. He told me how dangerous my actions were and how easily this could have ended much worse. I've never told anyone this story, but it's one of the worst things I've ever done and gotten away with. It's a painful reminder of who I used to be. This happened over a decade ago, and I've since gotten help. I'm grateful to have turned my life around. Story 20. I come from a large family in a predominantly Islamic country. In this country, not only are Christians segregated, but they are also physically marked similar to what happened during the Holocaust. My parents decided to convert to Christianity after I was born, and our lives turned into a nightmare. My Islamic relatives shunned my parents immediately. When I was 5, my grandmother arranged for me to be sold to the Brotherhood while my mom was at work. It turns out there were even doctors interested in buying me. That was the breaking point. We had to leave everything behind and flee the country. A relative helped us sponsor our visas, allowing us to escape. But things didn't improve much. Growing up, my parents and I were never invited to family parties, vacations, or gatherings. While my extended family formed bonds and built memories, I stood on the outside, watching from a distance. To make things worse, my dad, a sociopath, became a leader in another religious community. He preached values he didn't live by, making me resent religion even more. I've never shared this with anyone because of the ignorance and judgment surrounding anti-Islamic hate. People don't realize that many girls wearing hijabs don't have a choice. Behind every child forced to cover their hair is a set of parents threatening them with rejection from God if they don't comply. I've grown to hate all religions, especially Islam. Religion doesn't unite people. It creates division, imposes rules that strip away humanity, and fills people with fear under the guise of morality. It promises rewards like 72 virgins and a spot next to God. But in reality, it only enslaves people with false guidelines, robbing them of their power. Story 29. Years ago, I worked as a field tech in IT support. One day, I called ahead to my next stop about 20 minutes away to let the point of contact know I'd be there soon to upgrade some equipment. She mentioned she had to run to another office but would leave the door unlocked because someone was coming by to pick up a package. When I arrived, the office was empty, just as she said, so I got to work swapping out the old gear for the new. As I was about to pack up and leave, I was suddenly hit with an I have to sir us now feeling. I ran to the bathroom and did my business. After flushing, I went to wash my hands, but then I heard an ominous sound. The toilet started backing up. Shh. Piss. Toilet paper began bubbling over the rim and flooding the floor. The smell was horrendous, and it wasn't just mine. I think the septic tank must have been backing up. Panicked, I had no idea what to do, so I made the terrible decision to put the old equipment back the way I found it and leave. I called the contact and lied, saying I'd been held up at my last appointment and would need to reschedule for the following week. When I returned the next week, the office was undergoing renovations. I casually asked what had happened, and she said the guy who came to pick up the package had apparently clogged the toilet, causing it to overflow. She mentioned that he denied using the bathroom. If you're reading this, package guy, I'm so sorry. Life hadn't prepared me for that moment, and you took the fall for it. Story 30. When I was around 10 to 12 years old, I had Ross River fever for about a month. It caused swelling, pain, and exhaustion. I couldn't go to school and was essentially bedridden. We lived in the Australian outback, so babysitters weren't an option. My parents had to work, but my dad would check on me during lunch breaks. Other than an incident with shooters on the property, everything went fine. I was too weak to even get out of bed, so there wasn't much trouble I could get into. About a year later, we had a creative writing assignment at school, and I decided to write a fictional story inspired by that time. I made up an elaborate tale about how I'd somehow managed to pull my wardrobe over with the door open, trapping myself inside in the dark, too weak to escape, and with no one to help me all day. My mom, unfortunately, was a notorious snoop. She had zero respect for my privacy and went through my things regularly. One time, she found a Reader's Digest under my pillow and, without checking, assumed it was an underwear catalog and hit me with it. One day, I came home from digging forts or wandering the scrub, and I found her in my room, clutching my creative writing book and crying her eyes out. She thought my fictional story was real and that I'd been trapped in a wardrobe while I was sick. I was furious that she had read my writing, but decided to play along. I told her it really happened, even managing to squeeze out a tear for good measure. She was beside herself with guilt and terrified that the teachers would find out I'd been left alone while I was so ill. Nearly 30 years later, she still brings it up occasionally. saying it haunts her to this day. She's still just as nosy and disrespectful of people's privacy. So I've never told her the truth, huh? She'll likely go to her grave believing that story was real. Story 31. When my friend and I were 7 years old, we had a neighbor named Tracy who lived across the street. Tracy was awesome. She was friendly and had 2 big golden retrievers we loved to play with. Whenever we saw her outside with her dogs, we'd usually run over to talk to her and spend time with them. One day, we wanted to visit her and her dogs. We knocked on her front door but got no response. Being the stupid kids we were, we decided to check her sliding patio door. When we found it locked, my friend grabbed a rock and started smashing the lock until it broke. We let ourselves into the house, thinking we'd find her dog somewhere inside. The house was eerily quiet, but we didn't think much of it. As we searched, I spotted a bowl of Hershey's Kisses on the kitchen counter and decided to help myself. I ate at least 15 to 20 of them, leaving the wrappers scattered on the counter. Meanwhile, my friend went upstairs and found $5 in Tracy's bedroom. He decided to take it so we could buy ice cream from the truck that came through our neighborhood daily. After exploring for a bit, we heard the ice cream truck outside. We left Tracy's house, bought ice cream, and didn't think twice about what we'd done. A few days later, we saw Tracy parking a U-Haul truck in her driveway. We ran over to say hi and asked her about the truck. She told us that someone had broken into her house, eaten her candy, and stolen money from her bedroom. She said she was moving to live with her mom because her ex-boyfriend, who had been stalking her for 5 years, had likely found her again. Tracy believed he was responsible for the break-in. We acted shocked and said, "What a jerk," not realizing the gravity of what we had done. Later, the police came by to take statements from Tracy and the neighbors. Luckily, they didn't come to my house. 20 years later, I ran into Tracy at an H&M store. We caught up for 2 hours, talking about life, music, and movies. At one point, she brought up the break-in from years ago, saying her ex was arrested a couple of months later and charged with theft and breaking and entering. I smiled and said, "Good thing you caught him," while hiding the truth about that day. Story 32. As a kid, my dad was distant and uninvolved. He never took us on holidays, to the movies, or to restaurants, even though we could afford it. He seemed to despise my mom, likely because their marriage was arranged, which is very common in India. He focused entirely on work, rarely asked how I was feeling, and never gave me advice. He was like a robot. Coming home, eating, sleeping, and going back to work the next morning. To be fair, he probably had a lot of work stress, as he was a scientist in one of India's top institutes. Still, his lack of engagement hurt. Fast forward to when I moved to Europe, graduated, and started my career. Our relationship had started to improve, and I began sharing more with him. One day, I saw a heartfelt post on Facebook about how to raise kids and sent it to him. I didn't think much of it, but he called me soon after, clearly panicked. For the first time, he opened up to me, crying as he apologized for how he had been as a father. I assured him that I was doing well and that it didn't matter anymore. 2 days later, my mom called me repeatedly during the night due to the time difference. When I finally answered, she told me my dad had suffered a heart attack and passed away. I can't shake the feeling that my message made him realize his mistakes and overthink them to the point of triggering the heart attack. I've never told anyone in my family about this. They all believe his death was due to work stress. I still vividly remember his last phone call and how emotional he was. The guilt of possibly contributing to his death weighs on me, even though I know he loved me. Story 33. Years ago, I spent my summers working at a camp deep in the woods. The camp was spread out, with activities and buildings scattered throughout. One weekend, everyone had gone out to enjoy their day off. I decided to have a little me time and went into town for a nice Mexican dinner. A plate of quesadillas smothered in queso sounded perfect. After dinner, I headed back to camp, parking in the staff area, a dirt road in the woods. From there, it was about a 7 to 8 minute walk to the main camp area. It was around 7:30 p.m., and I figured I had plenty of time to get back and relax before anyone else returned. But then the rumblings began, the kind that signals something serious. At first, I brushed it off. I've been in situations before where I had to wait a while to find a bathroom, and I've always managed to hold it together. But this time was different. As I walked, the urgency hit like a freight train. Beads of sweat started forming on my forehead. My gut felt like it was staging a full rebellion. I picked up my pace, and then panic set in. I don't think I'm gonna make it. The pool house came into view. Yeah. Salvation, it was empty, and I knew I could slip in unnoticed. I was so close, 25 steps away. Then 20, then 15. I clenched harder, praying for strength. 10 steps, then the dam burst. I froze mid-stride, desperately trying to stop the flood. But it was too late. My bowels betrayed me in the most epic way. Once the immediate pressure subsided, I regained enough composure to shuffle to the pool house, cheeks clenched, dignity hanging by a thread. Inside, I made it to the toilet just in time for round 2. What followed was a scene straight out of the infamous Amazon reviews for Haribo sugar-free gummy bears. Wave after wave of destruction left me in awe of my own digestive system. The boxers beyond saving. They had heroically absorbed the worst of the disaster and had to be retired. I found a plastic grocery bag, wrapped up the evidence, and silently said a few words of gratitude for their sacrifice. Commando and humbled, I made my way back to main camp. I found a trash can tucked away from the main paths and discreetly deposited the bag. By some miracle, no one was around to witness my shame. To this day, I'm grateful for those form-fitting, stretchy boxers. If you ever need a pair of underwear that can keep your secrets safe, trust me, invest in good ones. They just might save your dignity, or at least most of it. Story 34. I went to school with a guy who was basically a genius. He aced every test, breezed through assignments, and got into an Ivy League school with a full scholarship. After graduation, we all expected him to go on to become a doctor, a lawyer, or a high-level executive. But a few years later, I ran into him at a local gas station. He was pumping gas and looked kind of rough, greasy hair, old hoodie, clearly not thriving. We caught up, and I asked what he'd been up to. He told me he had dropped out of college in his second year. He got overwhelmed with the pressure, had a breakdown, and came back home. He'd been doing odd jobs ever since landscaping, janitorial work, delivery driving. I asked if he was okay, and he smiled and said, "Yeah, I thought I needed to be something big. Turns out I just needed to be happy." That moment stuck with me, not because he gave up, but because he found peace. Story 35. Back in high school, there was this guy in our class who was super quiet, barely spoke unless a teacher called on him. People mostly ignored him, and some even made fun of him. One day, during lunch, a group of popular kids decided to mess with him. They stole his backpack, dumped everything out, and kicked his books around. He just stood there, silently picking everything up. The next day, he wasn't at school, or the day after that. A week passed, and then the principal made an announcement. He had attempted suicide and was in critical condition. Everyone was shocked. Those same kids who bullied him. They cried in the hallway, trying to act like they cared. But I saw what they did. He survived and transferred to another school. I never saw him again. I've always regretted not saying anything that day. I didn't laugh or join in, but I didn't stop it either. I still think about him. I hope he's doing okay. Story 36. When I was 13, I got my first crush. Her name was Emily. She sat 2 rows ahead of me in English class, and I thought she was perfect. Every day, I'd find excuses to walk past her desk, hoping she'd notice me. One day, I finally worked up the courage to write her a note. I spent hours crafting it, making sure every word sounded cool but not too desperate. I slipped it into her locker before class. The next day, I waited all morning for some kind of reaction. Anything. Nothing. She didn't even look at me. That afternoon, I found out why. A group of guys were passing the note around, laughing their asses off. One of them had seen me put it in her locker and fished it out before she could see it. They made copies and taped them up all over the school. I was mortified. I begged the janitor to take them down. He helped me out. I never talked to Emily again, and I never wrote another note. But looking back, I'm proud of 13-year-old me. I had guts. I tried one. Story 37. My grandmother had a little box of trinkets she kept hidden in a drawer. She told us never to touch it. So, of course, I did. Inside were old photos, tiny charms, a locket, and a folded-up letter. I read the letter once when I was 10. It was from a man named Daniel, dated 1953. It started with, "My dearest love," and went on about how he couldn't wait for the day they could be together, how he wished things were different. I didn't understand much of it at the time, but I remember thinking, This isn't Grandpa's name. Years later, after she passed away, I asked my mom about it. She got quiet, then said, Daniel was the man she loved before the war. He died overseas. She married your grandfather a year later. I think she never stopped loving Daniel. Story 38. During my freshman year of college, I was struggling socially, academically, emotionally. One night, I decided I was done. I wrote a note, deleted my messages, and went out for a walk to clear my head one last time. As I passed the library steps, a guy I barely knew from class called out, Hey, you good? I shrugged and said, just thinking. He stood up, walked over, and said, Dusty with a dinner one for num. Come sit hori, putinari in a warna. It's too cold to be out here alone. We sat for an hour, talked about random stuff. Nothing deep, nothing serious. Just enough. Firstern. I went back to my dorm and tore up the note. That guy probably doesn't remember that night. But I do. He saved me without knowing it.